I think I should be able to.
Hello, good people.
Hi.
Hi, hi,
Hello.
hi, Lee. How are you? Thank you for your support.
You help.
Uh, Hello.
Hello. We'll be
I'm,
opening in just a couple of minutes.
yes.
Hi, Catherine.
Hi Tom, you okay?
Yeah, good. Good to see you. Oh, I need to get a gallery view here. I'm sure that we're all just beginning to get the hang of using this system. I don't want to do my apps. Oops. I want settings. Get that off. Doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. No. I see we've got, is it Lee that's helping?
Yes.
Ah, that's now I've got my gallery. I've got my gallery view. That's what I was going to ask you. Um, and we've still got a couple of minutes, so we'll just give it a minute or two.
Am I visible? Hello, I'm Sandra. Am I visible? I,
Um,
No, you're not.
Sandra, you're not visible at the moment. It would be lovely if you were.
okay. Uh,
Um, and Lee, could you help Sandra become more visible than she is currently?
Well, according to my view, her camera is on. So
yes, my camera is on. That's why I'm wondering why I'm not visible.
um, could it be a hardware issue with your camera?
Because I can see myself. Uh,
That is interesting. That's not quite supposed to happen. Hmm.
but I'm unable to see myself on the screen there.
Are you did you allow Blue Jeans to
Yes.
um
Should I just disconnect and reconnect and see?
yes, why don't you try that?
Yeah. Yeah, one sec.
Thank you, Sandra.
I'm sorry, I just lost you for a moment. Now, have we? Oh, there's Grace. Hi, you're very welcome. Looking forward to your talk. Um, as I said, we'll get started in just a minute or two. Um, we should have seven people here so far, including Lee. Um, okay, so I'm going to just make a little introduction as we're all we're all gathered. I'm going to ask people to introduce themselves all around the table first, because I think we've got a small enough number that we can do that. Obviously, the numbers, in a sense, are not an indication of the audience for this, because there will be a lot of people that are going to view this as a recording rather than joining it live. And these sessions will be open for 6 months. As I said, it's not an indication of the level of interest. I'm Tom Ling. I'm Vice President of the European Evaluation Society, and I've been an evaluator for 30 years, most of that with RAND Europe, but also with Save the Children. And before that, I was doing similar kinds of work with the National Audit Office in the UK. Most of my work tends to be around complex interventions in healthcare, but I'm enormously excited by the presentations that we've got in front of us today. And I'm reminded so positively about the kind of diversity of background and interest that we have in our community, and the range of skills that we're able to bring into our conversations. And I believe it makes us an almost unique professional group. So I'm very, very excited to introduce the speakers in just a moment. But before I do that, because of the numbers that we've got, it'd be great just to hear a little bit from who we have in the room, other than the speakers, who I will introduce in a moment. And we have Birger Helt. Would you like to say hello? You could put your camera on if you like, but you don't have to. But you would have to unmute yourself. Okay, that's Birger is just settling down. And Geert Flix, did you want to say hello?
Oh, I'm Geert Flix. I'm a consultant for ACE Europe based in Belgium. I'm involved in evaluations for more than 20 years. That's the core business of our consultancy firm. And I also have conducted already several evaluations in the area of education. So I'm very curious to learn about your experiences. I'm sorry, I will have to leave in 40 minutes.
That's nice of you to tell us, because it's always good to know that was a prior commitment. That's great. We look forward to hearing from you, hopefully, before you do go. Birger, hi. You've now joined us. Hi there. Did you want to say hello?
Hi. I'm Birger Helt, originally a Swede, living since 8 years in Vienna, where I'm at the internal oversight at the OSCE headquarters. OSCE is like all United Nations organizations in one, so we do a lot of things. And of course, one of the things I've been looking on over the years is the impact of our, we can call it education, but basically a capacity building projects, which we have a lot. But I've been basically evaluating any kind of themes over this year. So anyway, I'm very interested in listening to you today. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. We look forward to hearing from you as well. And Yulianto, have I pronounced that correctly?
Yes, Yulianto Dewata here. Can you hear my voice? All good?
Perfectly. Absolutely perfect.
Yeah, I'm from Indonesia. I used to be an evaluator up to last year, and then I jumped ship into the programmatic area. I'm currently working for a philanthropic organization in Indonesia, focusing in basic education in the eastern part of Indonesia. So I'm excited to learn from today's sessions. Thank you.
That's great. And we're excited to learn from you as well. And Kimberly, just before we get started, we're just introducing ourselves and saying hello. Did you want to put your camera on and say hello? You don't have to. You could just say hello.
Hi, sorry, my internet connection has been a bit spotty. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
We can hear you perfectly now.
Great, yes. I'm Kimberly Bowling. I'm the head of evaluation at the Behavioral Insights team in London, and I head up a lot of our work on education evaluations.
Great. And as with all the others, really looking forward to hearing from you as well. First, so the process, sorry, is there somebody I've missed?
Hello, I'm Sandra here. I think I have some issue with the video. I can see myself, but unfortunately nobody else can see me. So I don't really know what is the issue here.
Okay. And Sandra, because you're presenting, have you got a slide show that you're showing, or would you like to?
I had a slide, but now I don't know how I'm going to show it.
Okay. What I suggest, Lee, is it possible for Sandra to email the presentation to you, and then for you to show it? Would that work?
Yeah, no problem. I'm happy to do that.
Can you give Sandra your contact details?
Yes, I'll send it in a direct message.
Lovely. Okay.
Yeah.
So Sandra, we will hear from
Thank you.
I might just put you third if you're not quite ready, but one way or the other, we'll get you, your voice, and your presentation. So that's great.
Thank you so much, Tom.
That's a pleasure. And we'll have a 20-minute presentation from each of our three speakers, followed by 5 minutes directly interrogating the presentation or getting matters of clarification. And that will still leave us with 15 or 20 minutes at the end for a more general discussion. So that will be the process. We have a relatively small number of people, but if you're not showing if your camera is not on, do raise your hand so that I can see if you have a question. But with this number, you can also physically just raise your hand and wave at me, and I will respond. We're well aware in doing an online conference that people get disturbed, or there are cats that come into the room, or children that need caring for. Don't be anxious about that. That's absolutely part of the reality of an online conference. So first up, we have got Grace Igueta, who's currently at the Regional Evaluation Unit of the UN World Food Programme in Nairobi, but I believe you're moving over to the WFP Office of Evaluation in Rome, aren't you, fairly soon? So that's very exciting for you and for us Europeans. Grace has a Bachelor of Science degree in Computer Science from the University of Nairobi in Kenya, and a Master of Science in Public Administration from the University of York in the UK, and she's studying for a doctorate in Policy Research and Practice at Bath University. What we're going to hear about is evaluating the effects of school meals programs on education outcomes in complex contexts, and a contribution analysis approach. So we're very excited to hear from you, Grace. So over to you now. You need to unmute yourself. You are muted at the moment. So if you go to the top of your screen, there are 4 circles. And one of them is a microphone, and if you click on that, that should unmute it. If not, I'm going to ask Lee again to do it for us, because it's not working at the moment. Lee, can you find a way to unmute Grace?
I'm trying, but
that's not working at the moment.
No.
Okay. Grace, we're going to work on that. I'm sure we'll get you in. And in the meantime, I'm going to go over to Catherine, who I know, if you are happy to kick off, Catherine, for us. Catherine is at the School of Education, University of Bristol. The topic is evaluation processes of intensive widening participation outreach interventions within 2 English higher education institutions. And that's exploring the nature of stakeholder involvement. Catherine is a PhD candidate at the University of Bristol. Her research mainly revolves around exploring the influences of evaluation, complexities of evaluation practices within evaluation systems, and the effects of stakeholder involvement in evaluation. So it sounds very exciting and interesting. And Catherine, can I hand over to you now?
Thank you, Tom. I'll just share my screen. I hope this will. Can you see my presentation?
It's just looks like it's coming up. And for the others of you, you can have just the single speaker presentation if you want that on your full screen. And you do that by clicking on the little speaker view on the bottom left-hand corner. But Catherine, we're not seeing your slide presentation so far. Lovely. There we go. That's there now. Thank you so much.
Hi everyone. Thank you for your introduction, Tom. As you know, my name's Catherine Kelly. I actually just yesterday officially registered for my final year of my PhD. My PhD itself is focused on exploring the influences of evaluation on decision making within widening participation departments in English universities. But today I'm going to present my master's research, which explored the nature of stakeholder involvement in the evaluation of intense widening participation interventions, and has subsequently informed my current PhD research. So just to give a background on the policies of widening participation, it's a policy that's been around in English higher education for over 20 years, and it's currently regulated, universities are currently regulated by the Office for Students, and within that, universities have to show through evaluation that they are spending excess student tuition by charging the maximum fee on helping underrepresented young people access and succeed within higher education. And evaluation has become more and more prominent over the years within this sector. And there's been much of the academic literature has revolved around debating issues of quality of evaluation, and this is focused mainly on methodological choices around randomized control trials, qualitative research, realist evaluation, and a lot of it really has mirrored the qualitative divide, which is why I put that image up there of the two contrasting stairwells. But really, there's little acknowledgement around the context of evaluation, which can affect perceptions of quality, what's going on inside universities. A lot of this evaluation is conducted internally, and one could argue that it's become institutionalized. But in the literature, we know very little about the decisions and processes of evaluation that are occurring internally, how stakeholders are involved in the process, how they're making decisions which can affect the evaluation practice. And so really this research one sought to explore what's going on inside, what's happening, and in doing so, hopefully will add value to existing research on widening participation evaluation. So my primary research questions were really looking at who do evaluators, and I use quotations there because in this case, because evaluation is primarily done internally, evaluators may not be traditional evaluators. They may have multiple roles within the organisations, and a lot of them are likely to be practitioners who deliver the programmes being evaluated. But who do evaluators identify as being their stakeholders? What are the perceived values and attributes of those identified stakeholders from the point of view of the evaluators? How do evaluators perceive stakeholders to be involved in the evaluation process? And then also, how do stakeholders perceive themselves to be involved in the process? And finally, to what extent does stakeholder involvement, their values and attributes affect the perceived quality and use of the evaluations conducted internally? So because it was a master's thesis, I had very limited resources and time. I used a case-based approach to personal network analysis. So first of all, I conveniently sampled 2 English universities, including a Russell Group University and a post-1992 university. Russell Group universities are most likely to recruit young people from high socioeconomic backgrounds, whereas post-92 universities are more likely to recruit young people from low socioeconomic and more underrepresented backgrounds. So their contexts are quite different, and the pressures that they have on them to widen participation also differs. So it's possible that their approaches to widening participation, their approaches to evaluation may also be different. So I thought it would be an interesting comparison. So my first case, sorry, I forgot to say, I conducted face-to-face interviews with one evaluator and 2 stakeholders from each institution, so 2 evaluators and 4 stakeholders in total. With the evaluator interviews, it included 3 components. So we first worked together on a stakeholder identification and analysis tool, which was inspired by Bryson and Patton, where the evaluators identified who they perceived their stakeholders to be. We then followed this up with a Likert scale survey. So the evaluators rated the attributes of their stakeholders, and those attributes included their perceptions of the power of the stakeholder, their legitimacy to be involved in the evaluation, their motivation to be involved, their knowledge of the programme, and their urgency for evaluation findings. And those attributes were based off of my conceptual framework on stakeholder theory in evaluation and stakeholder salience. This was then followed up with a semi-structured questionnaire to explore why evaluators rated stakeholders the way they did, how they perceived them to be involved in the process, and what they perceived the quality of the evaluation to be. I then also followed up with semi-structured interviews with 2 stakeholders from each institution, and the qualitative data was analysed thematically. So in the first case, the evaluator in the Russell Group institution was also a project officer who was responsible for the programme being evaluated. They identified in total 12 stakeholders. Those highlighted in red are the stakeholders I followed up for interview. On average, they perceived their stakeholders to possess the 5 key attributes, and that's reflected in the size of the boxes next to their names. They were also tied to every single stakeholder that they identified, and they communicated with them fairly frequently, so that's reflected in the thickness of the ties to each stakeholder. I also asked the evaluator who they perceived the stakeholders to also be connected to within their network, so that I could develop the network analysis. And the core features of the network are that there was a median tie strength of 1.5, so the evaluator was well connected to their identified stakeholders. But the network was low in density, so the density was 0.39, which means the stakeholders were less connected to each other. And in this case, one would expect the evaluator to have more control over how the network is involved in the evaluation. The evaluator really valued using data and evaluation to inform practice and make improvements, and rated their stakeholders, rated the attributes of their stakeholders in the same vein, based on their own values. And so, for example, the evaluator really positively valued the contributions of the assistant project officer. As the quote says there, they were really motivated to be part of the evaluation activities because we can't design a good programme without the evaluation. And the same was, the evaluator really valued collaboration, though they didn't explicitly discuss using a specific evaluation approach. Rather, they valued involving stakeholders with different skills that they could bring into the evaluation. So they described the head of Education and Policy Evaluation Unit as being really experienced in statistics, being able to develop comparator groups. And so the evaluator really valued their contribution. They also said similar things about the data analysis lead. And in this sense, it was almost as if the evaluator was a facilitator of the process, which makes sense because they were a project officer and they were using the technical skills of other evaluators to fill their own gaps in their own technical competencies. Evaluation was really viewed as a shared responsibility among staff within this network, but the stakeholders who were close to the programme were given agency as to how they could contribute to the evaluation. So, for example, the assistant project officer was able to run their own focus groups, but they did this collaboratively with the evaluator and the head of Education and Policy Evaluation Unit, as the quote explains there. They looked to the evaluator and the head of the Policy Evaluation Unit to say, we've got this focus group, we've got all this information, what are we going to do with it, how do we analyse it? And so they worked together as a group to to develop that further. There were varying perceptions of what the quality of the evaluation was, and this came out in both cases that it was due in part to the technical competencies of the stakeholders interviewed and also what their methodological preferences were. So, for example, the head of the Education and Policy Evaluation Unit, who was very statistically minded, felt that they needed to work on the quantitative rigour of the evaluation, but they didn't express it as a definitive, this evaluation is good or bad, but it was provisional, it was experiential and developing. And that kind of reflects the way in which the evaluations become institutionalised. It's routine, it doesn't really end, so there's always room to improve the evaluation. On the other hand, the assistant project officer thought the evaluation was fantastic and of high quality because the surveys that they were collecting and gathering in gave them all of the information that she needed for her job and for her job role. So the second case, the post-92 institution, the evaluator here was very different to the evaluator in the Russell Group. They were a data analyst and they were based in a separate department in the evaluation policy unit of the institution. And also unlike the Russell Group, they only identified 5 stakeholders to be involved in the evaluation. They were also only connected to 3 of them. And as you can see in the size of the boxes next to their names, they were less likely to rate them as possessing those 5 attributes, other than the outreach manager, who they also communicated with most. The outreach manager was actually connected to every single stakeholder and was the focal actor of the network, so more likely to have control over the evaluation process and how other actors were involved in the process. In this case, the evaluator, the tie strength of the network was lower than the Russell Group, and the evaluator wasn't well connected to the identified stakeholders, but also the network was more densely connected than in the case of the Russell Group, which kind of just highlights the fact that the evaluator likely had less control over what was occurring. The evaluator here also valued stakeholders that they perceived to have the same values as themselves, and this was also around using evaluation to inform practice and make improvements. But when discussing outreach practitioners, they said that they don't consider it as urgent as I think it should be urgent, so you can learn from the evaluation and make changes for your project. And you can see outreach practitioners, there's quite a small box next to their name. The evaluator didn't perceive them to possess those values that they also did. Also, unlike the Russell Group University, the evaluator is more selective about which stakeholders to involve in the process, and the involved stakeholders are perceived to be most powerful, and that was those they were connected to, the institutional evaluation group and the outreach manager. But when discussing schools, the evaluator said that they're not involved in evaluation planning or anything like that, so they don't have any power. We don't tend to involve them, but they also don't ask. And it was kind of clear through the interview that this evaluator wasn't as collaboratively minded as in the case of the Russell Group, and more likely to value an independent approach to the evaluation. But also similar to the Russell Group, the evaluation was seen as a shared responsibility among staff. However, in this case, staff weren't given autonomy or agency to do what they wanted in terms of the evaluation, how they contributed to it. It was seen as an element of their job description. They had to chip in and work on evaluation, and it was also driven by the outreach manager rather than the evaluator. The outreach offer discussed that they felt that there was a detachment between the coordinators who run the programme because they don't see where the evaluation goes to, what kind of outcomes the evaluation has, and they've tried to work through it and make sure that coordinators take evaluation seriously. But it's very different to the case of the Russell Group institution, where the assistant project officer was really eager to be involved. There was also detached involvement in this case. The outreach officer actually ran their own focus groups, but said that it wasn't linked in with the evaluation strategy at all. So they said that the focus groups were a standalone side project to develop our own practical knowledge. And that just kind of emphasises that detachment that they had from the evaluator, and the way in which they just kind of went off on their own and ran their own focus groups on the programme, but it wasn't tied in together. And similarly, there was varying perceptions of quality of evaluation, and this also reflected methodological choices. So the evaluator wanted there to be more touch points in the evaluation and to include more varied methods, whereas the outreach officer really wanted it to fit the work of the practitioners and to make it more simple to do. And just to quickly conclude, because this valuation was internal and it's really been institutionalised within higher education providers, the concept of evaluator as a role was blurred with other job roles within the institution. And although both universities took different approaches to their evaluation, which did affect stakeholder involvement and the perceptions that the evaluators held of their stakeholders and their values, the notion of evaluation wasn't definitive. In both cases, it was always evolving and developing and could always be improved. And in a sense, there isn't really an end point of evaluation because it's almost routine. Which is a function of its institutionalisation with that institution. It's almost, they see themselves as a learning organisation, but they can't really admit to not doing evaluation well, and so there's political nuance there too. In both cases, the perceptions of stakeholder values and attributes was affected by the evaluator's own values and their own perceptions of what it meant to work in a specific job role, and this can be seen in the differences between the evaluators in both cases. So in the Russell Group, the project officer valued collaboration and was, by virtue of their own role as project officer, better connected to the network. Whereas in the post-92 university, the data analyst was based in a separate department and had less connections to their identified stakeholders, and they had different perceptions of those stakeholders and how they wanted to be involved in the process. And finally, there were effects of internal and external politics inherent throughout the study, and this reflected mainly in their perceptions of the use of the evaluation. So although both evaluators and stakeholders across both cases valued evaluation to learn and improve their activities, all participants in all of the interviews discussed having to use their evaluation to prove activity impact and to avoid funding cuts. So there was this disconnect and almost there was a struggle between what their underlying values were around what the purpose of evaluation and their need to performatively prove impact all of the time. Finally, neither evaluator had previously thought about or tried to identify their stakeholders. They hadn't done that process. They didn't formally plan the evaluation. And this really reflects their training, their background training, and the way in which evaluation the way in which the institutions have reacted to their regulatory requirements of evaluating widening participation. And really, I think it shows just the complexity of internal evaluations and the importance of us understanding more about the underlying needs and values of stakeholders within these spaces, whether or not they're explicitly or implicitly involved in the process. And although this was in a very small scale study, it kind of highlights that although it's really important to look at quality and start assessing quality of methodologies and choices of methodology, but there's a lot more going on under the surface that we should also look at, and that context is very, very important. So that's all I had. I hope I was in time. I have written a draft paper of this that I am hoping to publish. So if you'd like to read it, please just send me an email or a message. I'd love to share it with you. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Thank you very much.
Catherine, thank you so much. So if people want to get a copy of the paper, do contact Catherine. She can send that to you. Were there any fairly quick questions? We will be getting room to discuss all of the papers collectively, but any specific questions that were raised, you can either raise a hand or you can indicate otherwise. I think we'll hear more about this, but there's something interesting about showing how the evaluator as facilitator begins to take on rather distinct roles, and that Hans Brunnings was talking about that this morning, wasn't he? About consciously developing a different relationship to processes of change. And in a way, this is a specific example of that, but we can come back onto that. Now, Grace, I'm going to turn to you now, and I'm hoping that your microphone can now be unmuted. And are you able to talk to us?
Yes, you can hear me now?
We can hear you. That's fantastic.
Let me try to share my screen.
Please.
You can see it?
We can see you. Ah, yes, that's now great. We've got that.
You can see some beautiful school children.
Indeed, indeed.
Okay, so yes, as you said, my name is Grace. I work with the World Food Program based in South Africa until last month. I'm currently in Nairobi on my way to Rome as Senior Evaluation Officer. And my job basically is more management of evaluation than conducting evaluation. So I'll be presenting this based on results of an evaluation that we commissioned, and I was part of managing it. So World Food Program, of course, we are in food security, and provision of school meals is one of the main interventions that we do in probably more than 60 countries across the world. So the purpose of this presentation, my presentation, is just to reflect on our experience of something we tried in Southern Africa for the first time within WFP, to, instead of evaluating our project the way traditionally we look at what we plan to achieve in particular intervention and whether we achieved that, we try to look at what are we actually contributing. So I wanted to position this within the SDG 4. So as we know, the world has committed ourselves to achieve, to make sure that all children have access to quality education. And there are so many interventions that are implemented by different actors trying to contribute to that. So providing a school meal, I'm sure in developing and developed countries as well, is one of those interventions among many that I've given a reference to a very good publication by Buddy and a number of people on school meals particularly. So the question that we've been asking, we have been asking as World Food Program is, how do we actually evaluate contribution of school meals to education outcomes? Because it's quite easy to consider school meals, yes, you give kids food and you're contributing to their nutrition, but how do these meals actually contribute to education outcomes? So that is what we try to do in this example that I'll share. So in Southern Africa, we cover all the countries. Before I go to the model, we cover most of the countries in Southern Africa, but our interventions are targeted. So the case I'll give on Madagascar is we go to the most food insecure, the poorest parts of the country, which is the south. So when then you think about how you evaluate that, there are a number of issues that come up that you cannot do, or it's not easy to do an impact evaluation as we know it. So then that raises question, if you wanted to actually know what you're contributing, and it's not easy to do an impact evaluation, what are the other opportunities? What are the other approaches that can be used? So a number of years ago, there was some work done by a group of researchers and practitioners that looked at different pathways through which school meals or providing school food in schools actually contribute to education. And I'm just showing that model here, which I found quite explanatory, which if you look at that, it says that you could provide food in schools can contribute to education outcomes, which is at the end, which is increasing access, promotion from one class to the other, and completion of school through different pathways. So look at the first one. If there's food in school, then there's an incentive for kids to go to school, which means that they are less absent, and then they don't drop out of school. So the second pathway is the households, especially poor ones, that because it's an incentive, they don't need to spend money on feeding their kids, so it's actually an incentive for them to send their kids to school. So that's another pathway. And of course, there's the nutrition aspect. So look at that model and you ask, if you're in a school or in a group of schools, we provide food, how can you assess them if you're contributing to the eventual outcomes in education? So what we did in Madagascar evaluation, we tried to use our model and then apply contribution analysis. So our main evaluation question was, what extent does school feeding contribute to achievement of education goals, which I already explained as attendance, which is access, promotion and completion, reduction of gender disparities, and achievement of national priorities in Madagascar, which is national education priorities. So probably those of you know, contribution analysis looks at, you collect information using different methodologies, and you analyze the linkages between the key factors and the outcomes of interest. So here, we wanted to look to collect information, look at the school meals as the main intervention, and the linkages with student enrollment, attendance, and retention in primary or elementary school in Madagascar. So we use the relevant explanation finder framework, which is very common when you use contribution analysis. And what this framework does is you look at each factor and you look at the extent to which that particular factor actually matches the predicted outcome. So let's say, for example, the assumption we provide school meals is in poor communities, if there is no food, the kids will not come to school. So that's sort of the assumed. So when you use a framework, you're going to test that. Is it true that if there's no food, the kids will not come to school? Then you look at robustness, the extent to which the factor is identified as a contributor. So depending on what data you collect, you're looking at has food been identified as a contributor to kids coming to school? And of course, you look at the scope because you want to see whether the factor is contributing to observed outcome in a wider scope. And then the prevalence, let's say you're looking at different districts and you're asking whether, if we look at presence of school meals in schools, how prevalent is that contribution of that factor, which is the meals at school? And then, of course, the theoretical base. So you look at the factor and say, is that grounded in theory of what we know? So in our evaluation, what the evaluators did, they took that model, they took the contribution approach and broke down school meals program, looking at the factors, looking at the interventions and the mechanisms, and asking, what are the mechanisms through which you expect that by providing a meal at school, you will actually contribute to school attention or school enrollment and school completion? So the framework is in French, but it gives you a sense that the evaluators did not just go into, your objective was to feed 100 children, so assess whether you did that. They're saying, what is the mechanism that you expected to be at play here for you to be able to contribute? So breaking this into now the key questions, they then went and did a detailed survey of 20 schools in southern Madagascar and doing focus group discussions with parents, with teachers, with people that prepare the meals, and then surveying 367 children and looking at different aspects and different factors. So what we found, which is not surprising, for those of us who've been in education and in nutrition in education, is in a poor community like Madagascar, where 34 to 52% of the children were said to come to school hungry, and 32 to 50% they don't have a meal before they go to bed, then you'd assume that having a meal at school is significant for them. And a number of them, like 10%, said actually if they eat at school, then it's a substitution. They don't eat at home. And yeah, that 1% they don't eat when they come from school. So that if we were only interested in school meals important in a school, I think that would be the finding that we focus on, say, yes, actually it is, and we should continue doing it. But because we are looking at contribution, the evaluators looked at the other factor. They said, okay, we know that you provide school meals to all these schools, but when we speak to the parents, when we speak to the children, when we look at the quantitative data, what is the extent of that contribution of the meal itself to the outcome of education outcomes? And what they found, which is interesting to those of us in education, is the core actually was the parents' interest in the schooling of their kids. So the meal is a factor, yes, but the interest of the parents in the schooling of their kids, that was the key factor they found. The other thing they found, which is quite related to the meal, is the poorest households, they constantly make strategic choices. So they're looking at the household and say, do I send the girl to school today or not? So they're not saying there's a meal, so I'm going to send the kid. They're looking at economic situation in the household and say, for this month, the boy has to go and do this, look after cattle and do other things, and therefore not to go to school. So they make economic strategic decisions whether or not kids attend school, whether there's a meal at school or not. The third point we found is, of course, linked to that, looking at different situations in the households, access to education is influenced by multiple factors. So meal at school was just one of the points, but lots of other factors that influence whether kids access education or not. The fourth one, which is critical to educators, is the school environment. So of course we know the school environment does affect school attendance, whether kids show up in school. But then they found the presence of a school meals program generally in a school to some extent contributes to the quality of the environment. So over and beyond the meal itself, there are kids having to eat at school. And when we interrogated this a bit, the evaluators were saying when they saw a school where ILO, WFP, and UNICEF were jointly implementing the program, where then they will have better looking kitchens and water, of course, and other elements around the program, then the school environment is much better, which then does contribute to attendance. The other point they found, which again is of concern to educators, is when you don't have universal targeting of a school meals program, increased enrollment in this school or this district that you're providing meals is sometimes at the expense of the schools you're not. And that's one of the things that a lot of school meals programs have to contend with, that the bordering school, the kids from bordering districts or bordering villages will just shift to the schools where you're providing the meals. And so therefore then the question is, how is that program impacting the education outcomes if the interest was the kids to come to school and to learn, if we are affecting enrollment that way in different schools? And last but not least, of course, the evaluators were able to actually show absence, with or without the meals, was greatly affected by absence of teachers or the competence of teachers. So the parents were able to say, yes, the teachers are not teaching, so why do I send my kid to school? So in conclusion, of course, as World Food Program, we wanted to see the contribution of our program, but taking this approach, instead of the traditional approach of just looking at our program, we were able to see, yes, the meal is a factor, the meal is an important intervention in a school, but within our wider context, there are other important factors. And so it contributes if those other factors actually at play, and especially the school environment, and then there are issues of the parents and their situation at home, economic situation at home. So I'll stop here, and I've provided the link to the full evaluation report. It gives a lot of information on each of the factors and the extent of their influence on the education outcomes, which I will encourage you to look at, see the details. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. Yes, I certainly will. A very elegant use of contribution analysis in a way that is very, because sometimes it can be slightly obscurantist almost, but I think in this case it brings out the important messages for decision makers very, very clearly, as well as pointing to the strength of the evidence that lies behind that to support those judgments. So I was just going to ask, how did this report land with decision makers? Was it seen to be very particularly helpful? Did they say it's more helpful than a lot of the stuff we usually get?
Yes, so when I listened to some of the stakeholders, we have the donors, the Norwegians who are actually funding the joint program with UNICEF and ILO and WFP, and then we have the internal stakeholders, the government. I think they showed the report as emphasizing the importance of the jointness of the program, because the joint program was in very few areas, and the majority of the areas were just our meals. So what they showed this report was say, guys, I think you should be doing more of the joint.
Yeah.
Because clearly that's where you can have impact rather than just giving the meal. It doesn't seem to be doing much.
Yeah, that's really good. And very much within that kind of realist tradition as well. So thank you. We will have an opportunity for wider discussions. Now, I'm hoping that Sandra Turkey is going to be able to share the screen with us. Maybe not her own screen, but share the presentation. Sandra, how are you doing? Are you ready for a presentation here? Yes, I can see it. So Sandra's presentation will be on an evaluation of a library program intervention in enhancing reading habits among children. Sandra has a master's in social work, and for the past 9 years she's been working on various areas of development, including child health and nutrition and early childhood care, and she was also actively involved in nurturing, caring and engaging children in education through the early childhood care approach. Her association with MMC began in 2017, and here she is ensuring smooth functioning of the program at the daycare centres on construction sites. So a really, really interesting background, and we're looking forward to hearing from you now, Sandra. So over to you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Tom. I hope I'm audible to everybody.
Audible, yeah.
Yes.
Audible, and we can see
Yes.
the slideshow.
Yes. Good afternoon, everybody, and I'm here to share an impact evaluation of an ongoing program that we did, just to understand how it has impacted children's love for learning and also how it has enhanced their learning capabilities. So this study was jointly done by me, Ms. Swati Bed, and Devdatta Purkayastha. So I'll move on. So before I give you a context of our organization, I just want to say where we come from. So all of you all know Mumbai, I think, pretty well in India. It is a financial hub and one of the largest cities in India. And because it's one of the largest cities, you have a lot of construction going on in Mumbai. And we have 28 states in India, and a lot of them live in villages. Most people live in villages, so they migrate for work to cities for better job opportunities and to have a better livelihood opportunity. So when they migrate, they form the unskilled labor force, and a lot of them get absorbed into the construction industry. So they are unskilled laborers working on construction sites. They migrate along with their families. So sometimes you have both parents working, sometimes it's only the male parent working, and we cater to the children living on these construction sites. So I'll just give you a little background about the organization. We were set up in 1972, and primarily what we complete 50 years next year. So we're a grassroots level organization who works in the city of Mumbai with children living on construction sites. So we provide, we run demonstration centers where children are able to where we are able to take care of their educational, health, and nutritional needs. So children between the age group of 0 to 14 come to our centers. We divide them into 3 sections, that is creche, that is 0 to 3, 3 to 6 is the preschoolers, and 6 to 14 is after school support. So we ensure all children who are above the age group of 6 go to schools, go to the nearest municipal government schools here, and they continue formal education. This is in a very small nutshell about the work that my organization does. And going forward, why are we doing this? Why did we do this impact evaluation? Is because, as you all know, India is a linguistically diverse country, and we have 22 official languages in our country and many unofficial languages. So when people migrate, families migrate, they have they speak many dialects, many languages, and it is difficult for us to, take care of them, because most of the teachers that we educate them in the Hindi medium, and that is the national language. So the medium of instruction in formal schools is also Hindi. So therefore, first, we ensure we have a tailor-made program for all these children in our classroom settings. And then we ensure that all children who are above the age, who are 6 and above, go to these schools. So for that, we have introduced Hindi as a language to these children, and how they acquire, desirable learning skills, so that the children are able to engage in the classroom settings. Those are formal classroom settings. And so we run an entire library and an education program around it at the centers. But we also feel that these children need access to learning material, reading material at home. Otherwise, they can fall into the gaps, because some of these families migrate from site to site every 3 months. So they might not continue schooling, and they can fall into gaps if they do not have reading opportunities available at home, because they might not go to a school if they move to a new site for a year or so, and then they come back, and then we have to enroll them into the next grade. So for that, we started the Firti Library program, which means the mobile library program, and wherein we ensure that all children get a book of their choice once a week, and then they come and replace it, every week, and that is what we ensure. So this is irrespective of their mother tongue. We do have regional language books, but we focus on Hindi more at our centers, because that is required for children to go to schools. This is a picture of, these are 2 photos, of the Firti Library program. One is, this is for the picture on the right hand side is pre-COVID, where the child is choosing what book he wants. If you can see, it's all in Hindi, and some of them are bilingual Hindi and English. And on the left hand side, you have during the COVID time. So Firti Library program was a champion during the COVID time. It saved us, because we couldn't reach out to children, but we could ensure at least the teacher living closest to the center could go and run this program. It has been ongoing since last 1 year during the COVID time. Moving ahead, I will explain the methodology that we used during the study. So as explained, the objective was to understand the usefulness of Firti Library program among school-going children with limited access to reading material, and who have been attending the centers, that is our demonstration centers, for at least 6 months or more. the sampling method used was purposive sampling, as in we had 22 daycare centers running at that time, and we surveyed children from 11 centers that have been running for 2 years and more. The total number of children that we catered to during that year was 1,379. That is between the age group of 6 to 14, and the total number of children we interviewed was 101, where we had 46 boys and 55 girls. The only inclusion criteria were children 6 to 14 years. The exclusion criteria was children who had just enrolled into our centers post April 2019. The study period was between October to December 2019. We did conducted face-to-face interviews. And yes, we did take consent from children before doing the interview. So we'll go towards the findings. So if you can see, 41% of children have participated in this program for almost more than a year. And this is a voluntary program. It is not a program that we force on children. And you have 20% of children who have participated in this for almost 6 months and more. And the newbies, 24% between 1 and 3 months have been part of the program. Moving ahead, the number of times children take books. So 53% of children take books 4 to 6 times a week. We have 13% who take 7 to 9 times, and at least 1 to 3 times a week, 32% of the children take these books. Then, do these children get new titles every time they go for a book? So yes, 78% of children get new titles. So at Mumbai Mobile Creches, we have more than 10,000 books of every level of reading, from level 1 to I think level 6 or 7, as they move up the ladder in reading. And we ensure we buy books at least twice a year for all the 3 sections, so that, you know, we have enough and more books at our centers, and we also repeat the old books. So that is something that we've been doing. Then after that, what do these children do after they take these books home? First, 48% of children read it by themselves, and then you have a 34% who also read it to their parents, and 14% of children read it to their siblings. Then, do children need help in reading? Yes, 79% of these children need help in reading, and 20% don't. And here, if you can see, 30% family member supporting is mothers. In India, typically in the section that we work with, they are economically and socially backward. Mothers are the primary caregivers and nurturers. So it's looked upon as a mother's job to support the child. Fathers are busy, or the percentage of fathers contributing towards child's growth and development is far less as compared to the mother. But something that surprised us was they reach out to their older siblings. So most of these families are at least have 4 to 5 siblings. And, you know, you have brothers who support them and sisters who support them. So that is something that is really good. And moving forward from here, distribution of ways in which family members and friends help children in reading. So 42% help them in reading. You have 40% of children who need help in learning new words or understanding new words, which itself is an achievement. So there is a trajectory which shows that children are interested in learning new things. So, and then you have a 10% who want to understand the storyline. Then type of support the children ask for. Again, you can see 57% of children ask for the meanings of these words or the stories that they read, the words, the meaning of the words. Then you have around 18% wherein they need to understand the storyline, and you need, I think, 2% who need to understand the synopsis. Going ahead, then how do these children utilize these books after they read the story? So there is 14% who do not utilize this book, so it is kept for the next round. Then you have 19% of children who create their own stories. So at these demonstration centers, we give a lot of importance to art craft and puppetry as a way of teaching. Because we believe that holistic development happens through a lot of activities, and we give importance to art and craft because of that. And it develops their voice modulation skills, it develops their creativity, it develops their it develops cognitive development. So we can see that coming through. Then you have a very small percentage who use them in plays, a very small percentage who create their own poems. Even it can be a 2 or 3 line poem, but they do that. Then you have, because art and craft is so huge, you have children who, all these books are colorful and have a lot of illustrations. So they do draw and bring those drawings to the center and stick it up at the wall and say, this is what we have done. So it's really, really encouraging. Then we try to see, we have some centers that have been running for almost 10 to 15 years. So we have 2 centers, and the others, our centers run somewhere between 6 months to say 10 years or so. We have centers that have shut in 6 months, and centers that have shut in a year, and centers that have still been running. So in spite of the centers running for so long, they don't have any reading material available in the neighborhood, which is really, really sad. Because all of them live in gated communities, and they are away from the active members of the society per se. But one good thing has emerged out of this is that parents are taking interest in buying books for their children. So reading material, yes, 78% material is available at home for reading. So we asked them what material is available. So 31% of children said that they have educational material available. So some sort of a guide or some sort of a supportive education material that is available that parents buy so that the children can continue schooling. Then you have 22% where parents have started buying simple storybooks or comics for these children. 15% children were blank, and 23% it wasn't applicable for them. Then we asked these children, do these children engage with their friends in understanding what books they have read? So here, I think it's 78% here, and I think 63% there. 78% here, children engage with their friends in reading books. So they do share. If you can see the next graph, you can see they share their stories, the characters, the moral of the story, and they also, some of these children also said that we plan that all our friends should get this particular book, and we ensure how it comes in rotation to all our friends, and then we move on from there. So which is very, very interesting for us, for a voluntary program to do so much. Then lastly, we ask these children that, of course, we provide storybooks to you all. What is the other interest area that we should add to your library so that you have access to it? So the children said that, first boys said that they want books on cricket, and kabaddi and kho-kho are national sports here. But cricket is big in India, and most of these children said we want to know more about cricket. So that's how sports came in. Comics, so which is surprising. Both children like comics, so they want us to include comics in the library. Then there is around 14% of children that said they want study aid materials. So this we were able to provide. So this we started. We have provided all centers with study material. Then storybooks, of course, that is an ongoing process that happens. So yeah, we are adding more storybooks to our library. General knowledge, we are yet to get good books for these emergent readers, books on general knowledge, but we are looking out for that. So this is what has come through. Then finally, our conclusion and recommendations. So this program helped us sail through the pandemic, we would say. So this program has been running for 10 years, and our actual reason for starting this program was to ensure that children start loving books and start loving reading. Because it's a new language, a foreign language, they have to continue. Just doing it at our centers and forcefully, or you have strict curriculum in the schools, that wasn't enough for them to develop the language. So that is why we started the program, and we are really happy to say that the core is still there, and children still enjoy the Kirti Library program as much as they did enjoy 10 years ago. And during the pandemic, for the first 4 months, we couldn't do anything. Everything was shut. But once things started opening up, we cannot still take children. We do not have schools running still. The government schools are still not running. They have not figured out a system. So children, they're just passing the children to the next grade without exams, without anything. So, somewhere they need to continue learning. So we ensure that as soon as things, there were partial relaxations, our teachers could go to the centers once a week and start the Firti Library program. Along with the Firti Library program, we started the Toy Library program, wherein we realized fresh children and the preschoolers need toys to learn manipulative, gross motor, fine motor skills. So we are running the same Toy Library program in line according to the Firti Library program. Both programs have been well received by our parents, and we are really, and children, sorry, more than parents and our children, and we are really continuing through the pandemic through these two programs. Apart from the supplementary nutrition that we provide, that is different. And then we realized that we could replicate this model, this program across different models that we operate in Mumbai. Also, we realized that most of the parents are either first generation learners or they've only completed their primary education. So these storybooks were a great way for parent-child bonding. Also a great way for the parent to reconnect to reading, which was almost lost. So that is something that we have discovered. And now we just want to understand that because we've been running this program for almost 10 years, we have other elements in the library and the education program, how those programs have actually helped in continuing education or continuing schooling among children that come to our daycare centers. I think I'll stop here. Thank you so much for listening in. And if you have any questions, do let me know.
Thank you, Sandra. Very interesting. I will open it up for a kind of wider conversation across the papers, but were there any specific questions for Sandra, specifically on her presentation? I was going to ask, if I may, how was the data collected from the children? I might have missed that. Was that through a structured interview? Was it face-to-face interview with the interviewer?
Yes, it was a face-to-face interview with the children. We had administered, I think, a questionnaire to children, and we would fill it up, and we would ask questions, and their responses were filled in. That's how we did it.
Do you think there was any bias introduced as a result of the interviewer, maybe the child knowing the interviewer, or do you think that wasn't the case?
That wasn't the case because I and one of my colleagues, we did face-to-face interviews. It was not the teachers who did face-to-face interviews. That was specifically to ensure that, we don't get biased results because they don't know us so much as they know the teachers. Right.
Great. Okay. Can I just open, I don't know if there are any other questions specifically for Sandra, but then we will open this up. Yeah. Hi, Grace, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Sandra. This is extremely interesting finding. So I have two questions. Maybe I'll pen my second question until later. My first question is whether you are a process of feeding back to the children these findings, because I think a lot of the findings are very interesting to the children themselves, including I was interested on the ones where they are sharing what they are learning and they are sharing the books they are learning. Yes. With others. So do you have a process of feeding back to the children on these findings?
We wanted to do it, but as our report got ready, the pandemic hit and we couldn't do it. So we are hoping, at least if the third wave doesn't hit India very soon, we should be able to open our centers and allow our children to come in, say probably by October or November. If that happens, we will share these findings with our children, at least of these 11 centers.
And you mentioned that you might have another question, Grace. I don't know if you want to follow that up.
Yes, my second question was on the expansion. Maybe I missed the point on the coverage of the program. Of course, I know India, even our district, is one large place, like a big country. So what's the coverage of the program, and do you see these very positive findings actually contributing to expansion, buy-in to expand the intervention to other areas?
Yes, this program can be replicated in many ways. We work in a very rigid environment, as in we have to pack up the minute the construction is over, or once the builder says that, fine, we do not want your support and there are no children that will be coming, we are only going to work with male workers or something like that. But if you look at this model, because it's voluntary and children enjoy books, that's something that we have realized over a period of time. We can replicate these models in small villages, in Anganwadis. Anganwadis are preschools run by government, and we have been providing trainings to some Anganwadis in Mumbai to expand their program. So we have been doing that in last 1 year. I mean, pre-pandemic, we, I think, catered to one entire district wherein we were training Anganwadi workers and how differently you can start interventions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know if Biha, if you've got any comments or thoughts or questions or from what you've heard. Biha, I don't know if you can hear that. In which case, I will, if I may. So each of you have highlighted in different ways the ways in which evaluations have played a part in facilitating change, in being part of a process of change. And I was wondering, in part, whether you see, how you see the role of the evaluator as, on the one hand, quite embedded, which is the case with Catherine, within a process of change. On the other hand, relatively independent, which was the case for Grace and for Sandra. But even in the independent cases, you were obviously trying to engage very directly with processes of change. I was just wondering how, from your own work, you each see the skills that we need as evaluators to negotiate that, and in particular how that relates to if the education setting is a particular setting, which makes that especially difficult. I mean, it's a very particular kind of environment, and working with academics in universities, I think, adds an interesting dimension if you're an evaluator, I have found. So maybe, Catherine, I don't know if you could kick us off with your thoughts on that.
It's interesting. I don't really have an answer, just that this has come up in my PhD research. There almost is kind of seems to be different levels of influences of evaluation depending on how close a person is to A, the evaluation, and B, the program itself, or what's being evaluated, and also the closeness to the policy actors. And so different types of information and evidence are valued more highly or less so by those different actors, depending on where they are in where they're physically located almost. And so I think it's interesting. It's more, I don't have any answers. I'm just really personally incredibly interested in the systems of it all and how complex the process is, and learning more about who those people are and how they're working together and how they're using information in different ways. In our case, in widening participation, there is that disconnect. There is that level of practitioners. They need the information to improve their work. The managers need the information to show how good they are at what they're doing, and to show how to secure their legitimacy of being there, for their department to exist as a department. So there's just so much that's affecting how information is used, and then what's done with it.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? I think there's a whole sociology of evaluation, which is the sociology of how evaluation is done, which is like the sociology of science. It's not doing science, but it's seeing what happens in the lab, or what happens when people think, this is evidence. What are they actually doing at that moment in time? Or this is relevant finding. What leads them to think that that's the case? Grace, you've got some thoughts on that, I'm sure.
Yes, so very interesting question on the role of evaluators. If we look at the education sector, especially in, let's say, African schools and the whole education, the way the interventions are initiated, implemented is quite fragmented. You can walk into a school and you're told this is a UNICEF project, and this is Save the Children project. And sometimes the stakeholders are made to think that way. So from my experience over the last few years, I see a good evaluator should be part of helping think about this as part of a system, and sort of think, how do they come together so we get better results? And for me, that has been a challenge, because each agency is trying to show impact of their own work. It is almost a competition in the same school, that I brought this and this, I want to see my impact, right? And my view is, as a good evaluator or a good evaluation process, we should have skill to say, we're intervening so we can improve education outcomes. So then as evaluators, so if the interveners or program people say, we are intervening so we can improve outcomes, how can we as evaluators come in and say, let's assess what we are all contributing? And for me, those are the skills that evaluators, as I see it, we are missing right now. We're so obsessed about impact of our own little thing in a school, rather than what are you contributing to the outcomes, and how can we actually evaluate that? The second question you asked in terms of embedded versus independent. I think it's evaluators knowing how to engage with the evaluation managers or the commissioners, because the independence aspect is important. How do you make sure, if we have contracted the independent evaluators up to this point, that we can carry on and make sure that this change is actually happening as a result of the evaluation? So we need a bit of skills there as well.
Great, really interesting. I think I mentioned in passing that I was head of evaluation at Save the Children UK, and you're completely right. What you said is absolutely right, and you can understand it. The pressure for each evaluation is to demonstrate the impact of your programme. And there's an accountability issue there as well, but it is a serious problem in terms of not looking at your contribution to the overall outcomes for it. So you finish up measuring the number of girls going to school and not what happens to girls there, or indeed afterwards, or on the way to school, or all of that stuff. It's very, very interesting. That's really helpful. Sandra, did you want to comment on any of that as well?
Actually, no, but I have two things that I would like to say.
Please,
we are a grassroots level service delivery NGO or a non-profit. And what we have actually realized, because all what we do is we do not have UNICEF, we do not have programs from these big funding agencies. So we are just here, we get money from the CSR partners, and we are just ensuring that we align our program with the government program so that the children are not left behind. So somewhere as program people within our organization, we always see how to align whatever we are doing along with the government processes, and not run parallel program, because at the end of it, we are working for migrant children who are invisible to the city, and we have to integrate them to the government schools. or to the government program. So somewhere that's how we look at our, that's how we look at our program. So I think I think that's all what I would like to share. I can elaborate if you have more questions. Probably I'll be able to answer better. But this is what I would like to share.
Okay. Yeah, did you want to come in?
Yes, please. Yeah, I just want to make a comment that, I said that we have a lot of educational capacity building done by the OSCE, and that's typically we train agency staff in various countries, ministry staff, and then what we do is maybe we don't look at the micro level, which we've heard here. We have the bigger questions. So what are the short-term outcomes? Did they enhance the knowledge? And then we find some data, some survey on that. And then we ask, well, if that's the case, are there any midterm outcomes? Did they change policies and practices, which is the underlying rationale? And then the long term, did it become more effective? Did they make more drug busts? Did the trust in the police increase in the population and so on? So that's usually how we do that, because we have sort of all of these capacity building for, ministry level, agency level staff, community police training that might last over 50 years. And that's also related to that at OIO, many of the evaluations, they are thematic. You might have a field mission, they've been doing the same thing for 15 years. Then we collect all 50 projects in one big pool and see if they have added up to something towards the end of that period. So I just want to give you some insight how we do these kinds of evaluation within the Office of Internal Oversight at OSCE.
And that's really helpful and really interesting. And that opportunity to look at similar projects across a range of time and place, and with doubtless different variable outcomes, then trying to understand what it is about the context or about the particular interventions that may characterize more highly performing programs. And are you able to pull out the lessons around that and feed that back?
Yeah. Basically, what the OSCE is trying to do, they're trying to transform societies. And we know from the World Bank and other studies that, to make a dent, we speak about 15, 20, 25 years, where we speak about good governance, corruption, security sector, whatever. But one of the insights is that, well, how do you reform society? Reform from below or reform from above? From below, you basically train staff. You assume that the knowledge is going to trickle up. It's going to change policies and practices and so on. But what we have found, it doesn't trickle up. You need to do trickle down. You need to have governments, ministries to have national action plans or approve a new law or a new policy. Then you instigate training to implement those policies, laws, rules, strategies. Otherwise, there's no reason for a high-level manager to implement any new practices if the government hasn't approved that this is the way it should work. So that's what we have seen. Reform from below doesn't work. But when you have helped the governments with the strategies, laws, new policies, whatever, then you can start training to implement all of that, because otherwise efforts don't seem to go anywhere. That would be one insight from hundreds of projects that I've actually looked at over various themes over all of those years.
Yeah, I'd love to have a longer conversation. There's a very close parallel in quality improvement in healthcare, where you need that hybrid top-down, bottom-up to maximize the chances of effect. And it's how do you understand that hybridity of change? I think can be very interesting. You raised just one particular question. We've only got a few minutes left. You raised a couple of questions. Unless anybody, the other speakers, want to comment on what they've just heard there. Because I did want to pick up on the point that you made about capacity building and the challenge that poses for evaluators, because you're evaluating capacity building and for example, in improving research capacity north-south and linking academics in the north and in the south, which I've looked at to some extent. That a lot of what you're trying to look at is it has this capacity improved long before you get to the kind of outcomes. I don't know whether the other speakers have some understanding of how do you, as an interim measure, if you like, not quite the outcome of interest, but the interim outcome of building capacity, if that's been part of your experience, either maybe Sandra or Grace.
Yeah, maybe, yeah, very preliminary views from our a bit narrow sphere of operation. So when we do evaluations of some of the programs that either the government implements without technical assistance, we look at what's missing, and then you say, actually, you don't have a framework for monitoring your program, or you don't have a policy on school meals, so you are not able to get resources from national budget. So then our focus right now is capacity for them to put in place what is not there. Yes. And so then we can say in the next 2 to 3 years, let's assess whether now there is a policy on school feeding, and we do the same social protection or something else. So I think by being modest that way, then you can see a progress towards one day that government will be able to have this, but focusing on what's missing at this point. And we found that quite helpful, the policy, the framework, and the staffing, though we struggle with the staffing, say you're missing an officer to look after this, so you will not be able to achieve that, then we focus on supporting that. It works in most cases, but it's a struggle, I would say.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, Hans talked about this morning about the importance of bringing time in, and how whilst we're interested in scaling up, we often don't look at speed, or we don't look at time in our evaluations. And I think that what you said does highlight the importance of looking at different timescales and recognizing that capacity building is a bridge to achieving something else, but nevertheless it's time specific, and you've got measurable outcomes. I'm aware
I would just like to, sorry Tom, can I just contribute?
Go ahead.
Yes.
Please
yeah.
do,
so,
please.
In India, last year we have just, the government has just introduced the new education policy, and it is completely different from what has been existing for so many years. But somewhere nobody is prepared. The government isn't prepared to how there is no framework, there is no infrastructure in place for capacity building, for evaluating the existing program, and what are the inputs that at every level that need to go. So we are working along with along with UNICEF and other organizations like Acer engaged in education to see how we can help them figure out. So I think as evaluators, especially in this context, I think evaluators need to reach out at different levels and understand what are the problem areas. We have just passed a policy, and you don't really know how it needs to be trickled down across an urban area, a rural area, a semi-urban area, a two-tier city, but it's going to be the same everywhere, I think. So I think as evaluators in India should take this up seriously. Others, I think in next 5 years is going to be a disaster, and I don't know how everything is going to be in place. So I think, yeah. So evaluators have a very, very, very important role, I believe, in the policy that has just come into place in India now.
Yeah. I share that, and I do think that evaluation is a fundamental part of a healthy society, and that we are running risks in how evaluation is becoming marginalized in decision making, I believe, and we need to reassert the importance of that. I don't want to live in a world in which all decisions are taken by evaluators, God help us, but I do think that it's important that we reassert the importance of it. On that note, it's 20 past. Can I thank you all very, very much indeed? It's been really, really interesting. I'm sure this will be listened to by many other people with a great deal of interest over the coming 6 months. And in particular, just a special thanks to our volunteer. Is Lee? Am I getting your name right?
It's Leah. Yes.
Leah, I feared I might be getting that wrong. Leah, thank you so much. For those of you that don't know, the volunteers are just a really fundamentally important part of the processes that we have. And thank you for helping us with our problems earlier on. And it is very much appreciated. So Leah and all of you, thanks very much. And I look forward to hopefully bumping into you in the coming 2.5 days. So take care, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks so
Bye.
much.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Bye.